Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, where today we are picking out the perfect signings for Ruben Amorim at Man United, starting with the defender that he simply has to sign.
He's super quick. He's an amazing dribbler. He's a great presser.
The midfielder that would work best in his 3-4-3, but I think he's slightly better on the ball than Mainu at the moment, and can also chip in defensively as well. I think last year he was over 3 tackles and interceptions. And the forward who could take Man United back to the very top.
He just has everything that you'd want in this United forward line, and he offers something different from almost any other United forward.
Yes, welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody, and joining myself and Mikey McCubbin today, we've got Sky Sports' senior football journalist, Peter Smith. Pete, how are we doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Great to see you. You've had the displeasure of spending a lot of this morning with me as well on Sky Sports News, but it's great that you've returned for a slot on the Lowdown. Really looking forward to today's episode, and guys, it's a massive one because since we last recorded an episode, Ten Hag is gone, and now it looks like Ruben Amorim is going to be appointed Man United manager. It's not, as we record this, confirmed. Really hope it goes through for the sake of this episode. Mikey, you're the United fan. A little bit of reaction to Ten Hag, and are you excited about Ruben Amorim's possible appointment?
Yeah, it's been quite a surreal week, to be fair. I think from a United fans' perspective, it kind of felt like Ten Hag was at this point where he could kind of survive any crisis. It just felt like the decision not to sack him in the summer when there were so many great managers available, felt like that decision meant that now Ineos were kind of had their hands tied a little bit, but in hindsight now it's easy to see that with the availability of Amorim, they were quite ruthless, and actually, with someone lined up, they were ruthless enough to go for it with Ten Hag. Until this week, it didn't feel like Amorim was a massive possibility. I was convinced that with the appointment of Hugo Viana at Man City as sporting director to take over from Chiki Bajirstein, that it was set for Amorim to go there. Someone a bit different from Guardiola, but someone who is probably the outstanding up and coming manager in European football right now. Amorim. The fact that Liverpool were really hot on him before instead deciding to go for Arne Slot last in May. All of these things, it just suggested to me that Amorim was had the privilege of waiting for a truly elite project to take over at. But clearly, as this is being recorded, Amorim considers United to be a project like that, and it does make sense in many ways. He can come into a United, set up, with a whole new hierarchy there, and really put his stamp on it. Whereas if he was taking over from Klopp or Guardiola, there's a higher expectation. There's maybe an expectation to do things a bit more similarly to a previous manager, potentially, especially in terms of a 3 at the back system, which I think was a bit of a sticking point for Liverpool. And Michael Edwards was, Liverpool didn't really have a squad cut out for it. Actually, I think we'll get onto it. I think there are possibilities in this United squad, and there has been a lot of squad turnover as well. There's a lot of young players, a lot of players who are playing in the Premier League for the first time. I'm really excited, I can't lie. It felt like it was like, it was kind of clutching at straws before. It was like, oh, well, we could go for Thomas Frank, but he's never managed, at the top end of a table before. We could go for Iraola, but similar story, really good tacticians, but not managers who have had to deal with the pressure of playing European football week in, week out, as well as challenging for titles. Amorim, of course, comes from the Liga Portugal, which is not at the level of the Premier League, but he's got to take the step up at some point. And I think United, I couldn't really think of a more exciting appointment than this.
Yeah, it does actually feel like a real coup, given the fact United are 14th in the Premier League, closer to 20th than first. All the issues they've had on and off the pitch over the last few years, and hopefully a manager of his expertise can ride the waves that a lot of managers have really struggled with at Man United in the last few years, with way more experience than Amorim as well. So it's obviously a huge project. But Pete, before we get into the sort of meat and potatoes of today's show, Amorim's work in Portugal deserves massive respect.
Yeah, absolutely. That first title in 2021 after 19 years, I think we take that for granted, really. Sporting aren't really the top team in Portugal at all. They're probably not the second top team in Portugal either. So what he's done over that period of time to win 2 titles, and really if he stayed this year, it looked like they would win another title as well. To turn them into that prospect is really good. We've talked about the players that have come through there as well on Sky Sports over the last week or two, about João Paulino or Pedro Porro or whoever it may be. There's been a string of talent coming through there who've clearly got better playing under him, which I think is probably, when you look at Man United, something we haven't said about Erik ten Hag's tenure, where we've seen high-profile players or high-quality players come in and perhaps not kick on and not look better than they were when Man United signed them, which is obviously not the idea when you're bringing these players in. And in terms of Amorim, I saw him up close actually last season when they beat Arsenal on penalties in the Europa League, and I was in the press conference afterwards. A lot of it was in Portuguese, so I was sort of sitting there and nodding politely and trying to gather what I could from Portuguese and my limited Portuguese. But what was clear was he had the Portuguese press eating out of his hand. He's got that charisma, which Ten Hag never had, really. I've sat down and interviewed Ten Hag, and he's nice to talk to off camera. He's got a nice way about him. But when you ask him questions about the club or the players or his tactics, it's all very formulaic. It's all very detailed. I appreciate what a coach he is in terms of the detail he likes to go into. But I just think sometimes in half-time, in crunch matches, is Ten Hag, or was Ten Hag, really the leader that Man United needed in those moments? I think there's evidence of goals they conceded swiftly after half-time, recently against Tottenham, for example, which maybe showed that the message that he was giving to them just before matches or at half-time wasn't really hitting home and delivering with these players. And I guess the hope is that Amorim can bring that mood and momentum up a little bit for Man United in the short term, and then over a period of time start bringing in the players, as we're about to talk about, who could play in the style that we've seen him deliver at Sporting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he spent some time at Man United when Jose was there, actually sort of studying him, and it feels like he's got a lot of that communication and charisma and leadership ability from Jose, hopefully as well, a little bit less combustive maybe and a little less sort of aggressive towards some of his players, for want of a better word. But Amorim, the reports about his leadership are really, really impressive over in Portugal. But as Pete says, today we're discussing the perfect signings for Amorim to take to Man United if and when he is appointed. Let's go with when. It's happening, guys, please. So we are going to pick out one defender, one midfielder and one attacker. Pete is going to play the role of sporting director.
Thank you.
Quite an upgrade, quite a promotion. Are you ready for the role?
Yeah, so what are we spending, £300 million this window?
We have kind of made the budget a little bit unlimited, but with the idea that maybe they pick out one or two of our players. I think they're probably quite unlikely to sign a defender, a midfielder, an attacker, at least in the next
that compensation package to get Amorim out of Sporting, paying off Ten Hag as well.
It's been a costly week. It's been a really costly week, but I think
couldn't even afford a flight to the Ballon d'Or, could they? Hitching a lift with Man City.
Well, exactly. Can Garnacho go with you guys? That was crazy. What a crazy week in the Ballon d'Or, but that's for another time. But yes, let's talk about a defender, a midfielder, an attacker. Pete will pick between our pitches. Mikey, do you want to kick off with your defensive recommendation?
Yeah. Okay, so I think me and Doogie did speak about this before. As chief scouts, we did speak about this before, and actually we discussed that although we're going for a defender here, we actually have decided that the club does not need any new centre-backs at this moment in time, especially once Lenny Yoro comes back. I think him, De Ligt and Lisandro Martinez are very much cut out for Ruben Amorim's 3 at the back system, and this I think will probably Amorim's system is going to be very influential of our picks here. Where United do struggle in terms of manpower is at wing back, and specifically at left wing back. So this is where I think we've decided, Mr. Ashworth, where we're going to be focusing on. First of all, I've gone for a really punchy target here. I think they're, first of all, one of the disadvantages, and this is something we would have discussed when appointing Amorim, was the fact that his 3 at the back system does not necessarily serve us that much in terms of being able to target a number of players for fullback positions, because there are only a few players really in world football who are elite in terms of the profile that they can offer as a wing back. So I've actually gone for a player who's out of contract next summer, has been heavily linked with, Europe's elite club, but so far nothing has come of it. And it's Alphonso Davies at Bayern Munich.
Okay.
You've gone
Very, very punchy here.
Can I just say, while you were leading up to that, I was thinking Alphonso Davies.
Okay, here we go. I like it.
He's already got the
great minds think alike. Great minds think alike. And I think, Alphonso Davies has not played really as a wing back during his Bayern Munich days, but of course, a left winger by trade when he was signed by Bayern, converted to a left back very, very quickly. But, Amorim's system requires his wing backs really to act like wingers. They press, they lead the press, but they are also big ball carriers. They are also, required to stay very wide and open up space in the middle. And this is something that I think we're going to see, hopefully from the off, from Amorim at United. And I think Davies he just ticks those boxes, doesn't he? He's super, super quick. He's an amazing dribbler. He's a great presser. He's shown that throughout his time at Bayern Munich. Yes, the Real Madrid links remain. I think we're going to be fighting a hard battle with Real Madrid here, but there are signs that things could work in our favour here. Ferland Mendy's recently signed that new contract until 2027. Fran Garcia also contracted until 2027. It feels like Real Madrid's priorities are not necessarily at left back. What they need is to sign an elite right back to replace Dani Carvajal, who of course have we seen his final full season at Real Madrid already, given his ACL injury? I think quite possibly. Lucas Vazquez can't, deputise there forever. There's been the huge talk about Trent Alexander-Arnold. That's not to say that they can't go and get Davies and Trent Alexander-Arnold next summer. I think Real Madrid's still heavy favourites, but I'm working on the assumption that Amorim is going to have a big effect at United quickly, and United, by the end of the season, are going to look like one of the most exciting up-and-coming projects in European football. I think
quite a turnaround.
I think it would be quite a turnaround, but 6 points, 6 points off the top six right now, United, and we're 9 games into the season. It's very, very early days. And I think if Amorim can get his system working, then by the end of this year, if Alphonso Davies still hasn't signed a new contract at Bayern Munich, he may look around Europe at who wants him and think, well, United are not where they need to be, but I could be that missing piece that they need on the left, and I'll be a guaranteed starter there. Whereas Real Madrid, not so sure. Ferland Mendy, has been in and out of form, but when he's on form, he's incredibly important to that Madrid side. Is he necessarily guaranteed week in, week out starter there? Not sure. Are Real Madrid even going to be as interested in him come the end of the season? So I feel like he is exactly the kind of profile that United need. In terms of his ball carrying, I think United really, really need that because they don't really have an elite ball carrier in the midfield. And although Mazraoui and Dalot are, fine as right wing back, options, I don't think they have the ball carrying ability that is required in an Amorim system. I think Alphonso Davies could solve a lot of problems on the left-hand side.
I think it's a great shout. Yeah.
It's very punchy.
Very good shout. I mean, I think a theme of the Ten Hag era was he was constantly waiting for Luke Shaw to get fit, wasn't he? And he was always saying that if we had Luke Shaw in our team, we'd play so much better. The connections would be so much better down that side, especially with Marcus Rashford. How do you think Davies would link up with Rashford, or would Rashford be on that left side? Because if you're going to have 3 attackers up there, would he be that?
This is the question, right? And I think we'll get onto this when we talk about the attack. But I think Davies is exactly what United need, and that he's obviously he can come inside, he can underlap, but really his strength is when he's on the overlap. And I think I don't even know if Rashford is a guaranteed starter, or even Garnacho is a guaranteed starter on the left of that front three, because it's very much suited to an inside forward. Bruno needs somewhere to play and will play in this side for sure. That was Amorim's first job when he came in at Sporting in 2020, was how do we replace the output of Bruno? And he managed to do that almost instantaneously with Pedro Gonçalves, who remains a key player at Sporting. I think possibly it could be Bruno, or even if he is to find consistent fitness, Mason Mount. That left inside forward role was where he thrived under Thomas Tuchel at Chelsea. So I think there's a lot of options there. But either way, whoever does play there, I think needs a really top class like wing back who is able to act almost like a left winger. And Davies is that man. I think, Luke Shaw, it wouldn't be that dire a position in that dire need of Luke Shaw, had been fit at any point really, for more than, a month over the last 18 months. But yeah, I think that's the reason why really. Without Shaw there, I don't think we can't count on him. I know he's still under contract for a while and is on big wages, but I think we really need to almost move on from him. As harsh as that sounds, move on from him as a regular starter at least.
Yeah, Davies, ambitious. I like it.
It is ambitious.
I feel a little bit like when David Moyes came in and he wanted Tony Cruz and he ended up with Marone Fellaini instead. Maybe we'll shoot for the stars.
Well, that feels quite apt actually as a description, because my player that I'm recommending is much more realistic. And I think Alphonso Davies is a good shout, but I think if you're moving on from Bayern Munich, where it looks like they're strong favourites to win the Bundesliga this year, I think what he really wants to do is become one of the best players in the world. And to do that, you need to be consistently competing for the Champions League. And of course, he's won the Champions League at Bayern Munich, but Real Madrid does feel like a much more attractive option. Look, other than that, it's difficult to see where he goes. Maybe Liverpool are looking for a left-back in the next few years if they don't see Tsimikas as their main man. But Balde at Barcelona feels like a good long-term bet there. Another huge club like Inter Milan, they've got DiMarco. So maybe Man United could get hold of Davies, but I think a player they could definitely get hold of is Ryan Ait-Nouri, who is playing in this system at Wolves, or at least has done in the past, and has an amazing injury record over the last 2 seasons as well. I think he's only missed 3 games in that time. And yes, his maybe defensive output isn't sort of top of the range, but I think actually what he does in attack for a fairly limited Wolves side is really, really impressive. So this year, he's already got 3 goals and 2 assists in 9 league games. That's the most goal contributions in the Wolves side. And his underlying numbers are absolutely remarkable. So he's at 0.13 expected goals per 90. That's just less than Phil Foden, who's not having a great year by any account. But that does show where he's at right now. His 0.26 expected goals and assists per 90 is only just less than Darwin Nunez, Hudson-Odoi, Anthony Elanga, either wingers or players playing for much better sides as well. And in terms of what Amorim looks for in a fullback and looks for throughout his side, really, he's a very low crossing manager. It's often all about take-ons and building play through dribbles and intricate passing around the box and waiting for the right opportunity and then exploding past your man and either cutting it back or having a shot. And that's why the likes of Trincao and Marcus Edwards have really thrived in his system. And Ryan Ait-Nouri is a really good dribbler. This season, he's completed 13 take-ons, which is the same as Jared Bowen. It's the same as Luis Diaz. It's the same as Anthony Gordon. And then you've got his defensive solidity as well, which is very solid, completing over 60% of his tackles. And he's only got 2 years left on his contract. So Alphonso Davies is more ambitious, but in terms of his wages, that's going to cost a lot more. I think Ryan Ait-Nouri, with Wolves' financial situation over the last few years, with them regularly selling top stars and a little bit unsure about where their financial position is, I think you could get Ryan Ait-Nouri for 35, 40 million pounds, to be fair. And where he's at right now, 23 years old, playing in that system week in, week out, 23, start of his career, I think he'd be a good purchase.
I think that, when you say his age there, I think that is quite striking because it feels to me like he's a player who most weeks in the Premier League has an impact on the game. I think sometimes that's not always for the right reason. I think sometimes he gets caught out of position and Wolves can look a little bit exposed down that side. But you're right. You see him in the box all the time. He's so involved in their attacking play. And you think at 23, there's scope just to get better. And I would expect him to go to a club higher up the table within the next year or 2. But would that be Man United?
Well, you've got the call, Pete. Who are you going for?
Look, I think that Sir Jim has been very kind to give me this gig. I think I need to deliver a big name to start off with and show him that I mean business.
Here we go.
Alphonso, come on to the party.
Yes.
That is
getting United back to the top.
But fair enough.
I think you made the right one.
Glamorous pick. Okay, let's move into midfield. Why don't I kick off, seeing as I'm 1-0 down and, it's a best of 3 contest. And I think Mikey made a really good point about Man United's midfield options because at the moment you'd include Bruno Fernandes and Mason Mount in there. But I think with the way that Amorim sets up his side and the midfielders he tends to use in the middle of the park, I don't really see that being Bruno Fernandes or Mount, to be honest. The players that he tends to use are kind of workhorses is a little bit harsh, but kind of shuttlers. They can do a little bit of defending, a little bit of attacking, but they're not pinging 30, 40-yard balls. They're not relied upon for the real creativity in this side. or really the progressive passing. That much more comes from Diomande at the back or Inacio. So I can see him using Casemiro a lot. Not nearly as much as Manuel Ugarte, though, who was absolutely phenomenal for Sporting in his final year there. Was completing over 90% of his passes. I think it was close to 7 tackles and interceptions in a side that were dominating the ball as well. And then Kobbie Mainoo as well, with a little bit more structure around him, a little bit more security behind him with 3 centre-backs. I think he could really explode. But I am looking at someone that could play in that double pivot. Ederson as well has used this system under Pochettino at Spurs, and he was actually played in that double pivot as well. Maybe that will help him out a little bit. And to be fair, Eriksen's, I think, actually performed really well this year so far in a struggling Man United side. But he's 32, Casemiro is 32. So I was looking at a central midfielder, and I think a good option would be Ederson from Atalanta. Now, he really came to everyone's attention in the Europa League final last year, where he had a phenomenal game against a Bayer Leverkusen side that were unbeaten in 52 games in all competitions, that were going for a League, Cup and Europa League treble. And he denied him it. Not by himself, obviously. Adam Lookman scored a hat-trick. But Ederson was amazing in that game, playing against, I think it was Xhaka, and was it Andrić that started that final as well? But he was absolutely phenomenal. And he's had a really nice growth at Atalanta. I think this is his 3rd season there now. He was signed by Salernitana the previous 6 months before he joined Atalanta, and he was signed and he helped them avoid relegation. And he's kind of played a number of different roles. He's had big defensive output in some of his seasons. Last year, I think he scored 7 goals in all competitions. So he can kind of do a little bit of everything. And this is a player that Man City have looked at in the past. He's a solid but sort of unremarkable passer, I would say. But still completes, I think it's 2 more progressive passes per 90 than Kobbie Mainoo, whose main strength is that sort of dribbling in tight spaces. But I think he's slightly better on the ball than Mainoo at the moment, and can also chip in defensively as well. I think last year he was over 3 tackles and interceptions. So there's a really nice all-round game there. Again, if you're looking for a real glamour signing, potentially not the guy, but I think this is a kind of nuts and bolts player that really makes the players in front of him really thrive. Like Dejan Kulusevski played amazingly last year in front of him. And I think he is the sort of player that Atalanta wouldn't be willing to let him go, but they do sell at good prices. And he has been used in a 3-4-3 in the past as well. So again, there's that instant fit with the system. And I think he'd be really gettable. He's only got 2 years left on his contract as of now, so it'll be 1 year next year. He was linked with Man City. I think, again, 40 to 50 million pounds, and you could potentially get him. So, Mr. Sporting Director, I think that's my pitch.
Do you think he's someone then who would fit into that midfield unit quite well? Because I'm thinking when you talk about Casemiro and Eriksen, these big name players that when they don't play, it's a story, isn't it? It's a story when Casemiro doesn't start a match for Man United. But if you have someone like Ugarte and Mainoo and Ederson, dovetailing, coming in and out, playing certain competitions, rotating in that midfield, does that sort of does he sort of fit into perhaps the group that Amorim would like to build here at Man United?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's been, for his first year at Atalanta, he was a little bit more in and out the side, but since really the start of last year, playing alongside Martin de Roon, who's really experienced, but playing behind Dejan Kulusevski, that Atalanta side really came alive. And Dejan Kulusevski's numbers in front of him really exploded, which is something that you'd hope if Bruno Fernandes is used on the left wing, that would really happen with him, because he's taken a slight dip in terms of his output as well. And he's at a nice age. He's 25. He's just broken into the Brazilian national team. And Atalanta to United feels like a pathway that a lot of players would be interested in. It's not trying to sign someone from an elite club and make them take the step down to a mid-table Man United, who will be probably mid-table in January, even if things go exceptionally well. So I think it's an achievable signing, and he's at the right level right now to make an impact.
Good shout. What have you got?
Interesting. I've kind of thought in a similar vein to Dukes. I don't think there's that much elite central midfield talent out there right now, if I'm totally honest. I think there's a number of names. I think, Bruno G would be the dream option, but out of Newcastle, tough. Locatelli at Juve, Maxence Caqueret at Lyon. They're all decent names, but I think Caqueret, I don't know. Physically, I'm not sure he's quite there. I've gone for actually someone out of the Premier League and actually someone out of Wolves as well.
Wolves.
So we've decided not to go. We've decided not to go, and especially the fact that we not decided to go for Ait-Nouri. It means that we're a bit more in favour here when negotiating with Wolves, and that's Joao Gomes. And similarly to Dukes, I've gone for him because he is a real kind of system midfield player. He can do it. He can kind of do a bit of everything. He's very much a box-to-box player. He was nicknamed the Pitbull in Brazil when he was playing for Flamengo before arriving at Wolves in January 2023. And I think it's almost the most impressive thing about Joao Gomes and what really makes him stand out to me is his ability to adapt quickly. He came from Brazil to the Premier League, huge kind of culture shock. I know, he comes from Brazil, comes to a team which is, full of Portuguese players, full of Portuguese speakers. And so that, that obviously, that helps a little bit, that helps you bed in. But nevertheless, to be able to adapt so quickly to the style of the Premier League, to then, 18 months later have racked up 9 caps for Brazil, partnered Bruno G at the Copa America this summer. I know Brazil didn't get had a disappointing tournament, but nevertheless, his rise has been really astronomical. Still only 23 years old. And I think stylistically, he's a good fit. I think the one argument that could be made against this is perhaps, he has a lot of the similar qualities to Manuel Ugarte. United were linked with him around the same time as they were linked with Ugarte. He was seen as almost a backup option. But I do think in this midfield, you need someone who's got legs, who's tenacious, who's willing to put in the defensive work as well. I still think that United can't afford really to have a luxury option in this midfield. There's, as much as Amorim is going to be a breath of fresh air, I think that this midfield is still in danger of being left a bit exposed because in his system, those 2 midfield players have to cover an awful lot of ground. And so I think there are going to be games in which he thinks, actually, I'm not sure if I can play Kobbie Mainoo here. I think I need to have 2 very defensively astute players, and the creativity and the ball progression is going to have to come from the wing backs and from the more advanced players behind the striker. Or Lisandro Martinez steps into midfield from time to time, which we've seen at Sporting. I think Sebastian Coates, before he left, was the kind of key to that Sporting side, and he often would step into midfield. I see something similar happening with Lisandro, and if it's not Lisandro, then Matthijs de Ligt potentially fulfilling that role. So Joao Gomes doesn't offer that much in terms of passing, in terms of progressive passing. That's probably the weakest side of his game. However, he's been in the Wolves side, which have not seen that much of the ball over the last 2 years. And especially this season, they've been struggling, haven't they? And he's actually been played a bit further forward since the signing of Andre at Wolves. So he's quite tactically versatile in that sense. He can press from the front, which I think is really useful because Ugarte is a bit more of a sitting player. Like I can see Joao Gomes really going and harrying opposition defenders, harrying opposition defensive midfielders, and just causing a bit of chaos there and helping break up play. I think last season he ranked really, really highly in the Premier League for fouls. Which I know, you don't want to give away fouls, but I think that's something that has been levelled at United a lot over the last 2 years. Too easy to play through. There's so many times we've seen in big games for United, whether that be especially in Europe, but in big games in the Premier League as well under Ten Hag, so many moments where it's just like, just bring him down, and whoever's got their man does not bring them down at that crucial moment. Someone like Joao Gomes, I think, could be really effective at that, and him and Ugarte together in a big game where United do have their backs against the wall, because let's face it, we can't expect Amorim to introduce, we can't be expecting Sporting CP kind of possession numbers straight away. I think this season, and even potentially next season, I think for United to really stamp their authority in the Premier League, I think they're going to have to do it in a little bit of a different way under Amorim. I think Amorim, despite keeping his shape, will be more tactically flexible. And so I think United are going to have to, find different ways of being less susceptible to teams on the break. That was obviously a big struggle for Ten Hag. And so I think Joao Gomez's ability to break up play like that will be really, really crucial.
Yeah, I think it's a good shout. If we're going to sort of play these 2 off against each other, it's a bit of a cliched phrase, knowing the Premier League. I saw some of the final quotes from Erik Ten Hag. Actually, I was in his press conference after the West Ham game, and he was asked some questions which now it seemed very strange for him to be asked. He was asked about like Luke Shaw's latest setback. So we've got some quotes about what Erik ten Hag thinks about Luke Shaw, which probably never see the light of day now. But he was also talking about Manuel Ugarte and what he needed in his midfield, and he was talking about how it was taking a bit of time for Ugarte to get up to speed really with the English Premier League and what the demands of it. How big an issue do you think that is if we're comparing, say, Ederson and Gomes in terms of coming into Man United, especially when you've got a new manager, a new coaching staff, to be signing players who know the Premier League?
Yeah, I think it is a factor, isn't it? I think Ugarte was really unfortunate to be signed really late in the window, despite the fact he was United's top midfield target. They obviously managed to sign Yoro and De Ligt and Mazraoui before him. He arrived, and Man United, I mean, I was there. He was paraded on the pitch before the game against Liverpool, and they end up losing that game 3-0. Confidence was already hit. And it feels like Ugarte hasn't got off to the start that he wanted to. He didn't have a pre-season either. But I like the fact that Ederson has already got games under his belt for Atalanta this season. He went to the Copa America with Brazil. He played more for Atalanta last season than Ugarte did for PSG as well. Ugarte wasn't really used in 2024 and then went to the Copa America with Uruguay and didn't get a pre-season. So he's been really hot and cold in terms of his involvement, whereas Ederson's kind of been on a low simmer all this year. But yeah, it would be an adaptation, but Ederson has so far adapted really seamlessly to Serie A, which I think is a more intense league than it used to be in terms of the midfield battles. I think there's a lot more quality in there than there used to be, say, 10 years ago. So I think there's a decent chance that he adapts fairly soon. But I also think in Ten Hag's version or iteration of Man United, that, as we've already discussed, the midfielders were often really, really exposed by a sort of really disjointed press in front of them, and the backline often being 20 yards further deeper than they should have been as well. So they often looked completely outnumbered and swarmed over. Whereas I'm imagining Amorim's system, they, as we discussed this morning, they press a lot higher, more intensely from the top, and that backline is really higher up because they've got 3 defenders back there. One of them, at least in Euro's pretty quick, and De Ligt's De Ligt's not the quickest, but either way, they should be able to cover for that midfield. So I could see it being an easier adaptation than Ugarte, but I can see why it would be a factor in your mind, Dan.
This is why I get paid the big bucks to make these sort of calls. Well, I think to try and keep my chief scouts equally happy, I'm going to lean towards Doogie on this one, and I'll give you some money. Give you a go and get him. Go and get him for us.
Love it. Okay, we are 1-1 going into the attacker, just where we want to be. Mikey, you lost the last round. Do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, sure. I do think Ederson was a hard one to go up against. I think Ederson's passing will serve us really well. I think that was one thing that really counted against Joao Gomes. As for the forwards, this was the toughest. This really got me thinking, because I think I've been up all night. I've been racking my brains because in some ways, actually, this forward line now under Amorim in some ways becomes less of a headache. It feels like United's attackers are more suited to this than what they were under Ten Hag, just because you now have the option of Bruno in there, you have the option of Mount in there. There's one less position to fill effectively. And seeing as that we've now got a suitably steely midfield behind them, I think, we've got a ton of options. And I think that left side, I don't think we need too much. I think up front, look, there's been a striker problem at United for years, but having signed Zirkzee in the summer, having signed Højlund the previous summer, I want to give them both a run. I think Højlund profiles very similarly to Victor Gyökeres at Sporting. We saw how brilliantly Amorim was able to transition Sporting to a more direct attacking style to suit Gyökeres, and it worked effectively. Højlund is in that mould, and I feel like that kind of direct style is something that we will see come to the fore under Amorim at United. To be honest, United's best performances last season were kind of in that style, and that's when we saw Højlund really thrive. So I expect that to happen, and even with Højlund's patchy injury record, I still see Zirkzee being able to deputise there, because with the quality of inside forward we have, at least when Garnacho, Rashford and Ahmad are on form, I actually think there is space in that system for Zirkzee to be able to play his game and to bring those players into play. Until last season, Sporting didn't really have an elite, goal scoring centre forward. So I think Amorim's got, will have that in the locker. And in the meantime, Xerxes can probably play as one of those inside forwards as well, if needs be. So I'm not going for a centre forward, even though I think there could be an argument for it. I'm going for that right side because I think as good as Amad has been, he's the only player who I really see in that position. And otherwise, I don't think United have the bodies in there unless Anthony can somehow find some form under Amorim. Who knows? Rashford, as good as he's been on the right in the last few weeks, he is a lot more of a wide player there. I think really you need someone who can cut in and who can also, and this is where it, the most crucial thing for me, someone who can provide creativity there, because Bruno Fernandes has not had a great start to the season. He's barely creating a chance a game. We're used to seeing Bruno create, upwards of 2.5 chances a game. He is the chief chance creator in this United side. And I have no doubt that Amorim will get a tune out of him again. Like, he's just too good not to suddenly become a bad creative player overnight. However, he is 30 and he does need replacing in the long term. And in the meantime, United need someone to take that burden off him anyway. There needs to be more creation in this United side. We're not getting a ton of it from our fullbacks or our wingbacks. We're not getting a ton of it. We're certainly not getting a ton of it from central midfield. I think that right-sided attacker, if we are to have someone who can, play when Amad isn't playing, we've just got an awful lot of goal scorers. We don't have people creating those goal-scoring opportunities. And that's why I've gone for another punchy target.
Lamine Yamal.
Not well. I wish. If only. If you're willing to free up the funds, let's do it. I was also initially thinking Kudus at West Ham, who's also quite punchy, but West Ham aren't in the best state right now, because I think he'd be suited to that role. But again, just not that creative. I've gone for Dejan Kulusevski out of Spurs, which good. I actually did make a small hint at this a couple of weeks ago, and Joe Tomlinson said I was crazy. There's no chance we're getting him out of Spurs. But again, if United are in the ascendancy by the end of this year, and Ange Ball is yet to see a consistent push for the top three positions in the Premier League so far. Tottenham are up and down week to week. They're either playing amazingly or that high line is getting absolutely exposed. As we saw on the weekend, Palace, just with a decent game plan, were able to undo them. I do feel like by the end of this season, someone like Kulusevski could be thinking, is this actually the right project for me? And I think, he is gettable in that sense. He'll cost a lot of money. He's under contract for a while at Spurs. But I just think he ticks almost every box that United need. Like, his numbers this year are just mad. 3.2 chances created per 90 minutes this term. 2.3 shots as well. He's a goal threat too, and that's what United will also be looking for from that right inside forward. He's also a really good presser. He's making almost 2 tackles and interceptions per game this year. That's actually down on last year. And also, crucially, he doesn't mind giving away a foul in the opposition third as well.
You love a foul.
Yeah, this United team needs to be a bit more nasty. And last year he ranked third in the Premier League for fouls committed. This year he ranks fourth, and he also ranked third in the Premier League last year for passes into the penalty area. I think he just has everything that you'd want in this United forward line, and he offers something different from almost any other United forward. He has the creativity of Bruno, but he also is a brilliant dribbler. He has, I guess, the dribbling ability of someone like Amad, but he also has a lot of creativity, and arguably just as good a finisher as Amad.
As we saw at Old Trafford the other week.
Well, exactly. Yeah. He's got I don't know. He is really a player in the ascendancy here.
Do you think
he's also sorry. Yeah, no, go on.
I was just say, do you think his recent sort of shift from being a right winger to coming inside, maybe sometimes playing as a sort of 10 or an advanced 8, however you call that position in Ange Postecoglou's setup, or even as a false 9 at times in pre-season and earlier in the season, has that sort of helped him maybe prove that he could fit into Amorim's system and how he plays those front 3 players?
I think absolutely, yeah, for sure. I think before for a long time, with Kulusevski, it felt like there was like a really great player in there waiting to happen, wasn't it? Someone who had all the attributes, but, you know, partly due to fitness issues and, you know, bedding into a new side, we were yet to see it on a consistent basis. But the fact that we've now seen Kulusevski perform incredibly well as a 10 for 12 months now, you know, even though he's not been playing there all the time. And the fact that he's, you know, tactically versatile enough to be able to play there, but also pull out wide, I think, makes him such an outstanding candidate. So, I'm not sure I've got a huge amount more to say. I think the only argument we could make against this, I think, is, you know, he will cost a lot of money, and there are other players out there like Takefusa Kubo, Julio Enciso even at Brighton, Hugo Ekitike even at Frankfurt, who are either around the same age or younger, and potentially would be a bit easier to get out of their clubs and maybe a bit cheaper because they're not a direct rival. But again, I'm going a bit safe. I'm going with Premier League proven, and you know, I'm quite keen for United to become an elite side again in the next 2 years. You know, I know Amorim is a project manager, but it does feel like then there's an opportunity here, right? Like Klopp's no longer at Liverpool. Who knows if Pep's going to be at Man City this time next year? I think that there's a real opportunity here for United to have quite a steep rise, and Kulusevski, as well as Alphonso Davies on the left flank, can help facilitate that.
Absolutely flying down
the
both
budget.
flanks.
The budget.
Alphonso Davies was a free signing, wasn't he?
He is a free signing.
Yeah, but the wage, the signing on bonus. Wow. I mean, it's punchy. It's definitely punchy. Okay, I've gone for another player, and this is a little bit of a theme of my suggestions, that are playing in a 3-4-3 as it stands. And look, it's quite punchy, but I think this player's team, I think it's fair to say, have not been as good as last year. It feels like their stock as a team is a little bit lower. There's speculation their manager might leave in the summer. There's speculation another key player might leave in the summer. And it's Victor Boniface at Bayer Leverkusen. And I think he deserves massive respect for his career to date, to be honest, because he had a tricky start. You know, he only came over to Europe in 2019, went to Bodo Glimt, was there for 2-3 seasons and had an ACL tear in 2 of them. So he's come back from that, gets that move to Union Saint-Gilloise, has 1 season there, is one of the top scorers in the Europa League, shines against Bayer Leverkusen in one of their quarter-final games, scores against them, gets a move to Bayer Leverkusen, who have just lost Moussa Diaby, who have had a striker in Patrick Schick that's had amazing seasons in the Bundesliga and for the Czech Republic, but has injury problems, and there's big responsibility on his shoulders. And despite that, he is the spearhead of a side, along with Florian Wirtz, that romped to the Bundesliga title and DFB Pokal and Europa League final, as I said already. And his record in all competitions, 21 goals and 10 assists in 34 games, having just joined a brand new side that weren't expected to have the season they had. Sounds a little bit like Man United. And the way he was able to carry that side with amazing ball striking, this physical capabilities, and just the link-up play as well. And I think he's a nicely different alternative to someone like Rasmus Højlund, who I totally agree with Mikey, is much more in the Victor Gyökeres mould, a channel runner, amazing pace in behind. Victor Boniface has that to a certain degree, but his link-up play is reminiscent of a sort of Karim Benzema at his prime, like pulling left, linking up so well with the flying wing-backs or the wing-back that's likely to come inside in Grimaldo, or pulling right and linking up with Frimpong. And I think it's easier to adapt when you've joining a club that's going to be playing in the same system. And even this year, I think it's 8 goals and 1 assist in 11 games in all competitions. And he's kind of doing his bit. It's Bayer Leverkusen's defence that's taken a real step back, with Josip Stanisic having returned to Bayern Munich, Kosunu, who was played a lot in the first half of last year, he's gone to Atalanta. And this is a guy whose shots per 90 are one of the highest in Europe so far. I think he's at 0.92 expected goals per 90, which is just lower than Haaland, Lewandowski, Asensio and Retegui in Europe's top 5 leagues. So the way he's operating right now, it looks like he's supposed to average just under a goal per game. And if he stays fit for this entire season, despite playing for a Bayer Leverkusen side that have taken a step back in terms of their defensive solidity, I think you could easily see him score 25 goals in all competitions, which would be a great return for a player that's still supposed to be adapting to Europe's top 5 leagues. He's taken everything in his stride. He's 23 years old. And yes, he did miss 20 games with injury last year, which is a little bit of a concern. And he's had those 2 ACL injuries. But when this guy is on the pitch, he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. And the fact they've got Højlund, the fact they've got Xerxes means he doesn't need to play every game as well, which should help with his fitness record. I think he's going to be expensive. He's a 60, 70 million pound plus signing, I think. But if you're losing Xabi Alonso, if you're losing potentially Florian Wirtz, Jeremy Frimpong, unfortunately, all great sides, it's the football food chain. You end up being picked apart. It feels like Bayer Leverkusen are going to be picked apart next summer. And Victor Boniface, I think, is potentially gettable. And I think he's in a signing to really take Man United forward right now, but also in the future.
I like it, do. I mean, I have to say there was a little alarm going off in my head when you said about the ACLs because, that is a worry always. But whenever you see Boniface, we talked about adaptation to the Premier League earlier. I think he's a player who's got the attributes that would suggest he would do pretty well in this league, don't you think? I think anyway, the Bundesliga to the Premier League is not quite as big a step as it is from some leagues to the Premier League in terms of the type of football. But I think he's got a very impressive record. He's got that winning history as well, which I think is really important, which maybe Kulusevski doesn't have on his CV so far. And I think that mentality is important as well.
Okay. One thing I would ask though, do you think he can actually? You could see him in a front two with Højlund. Like I'm not so
I think
sure.
they probably it's one or the other really, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think Højlund clearly needs time to develop. He was only playing regularly for Atalanta for 6 months before he got his huge move to Man United, and he's had injury issues at Man United. I think there's clearly a talented player in there, and it looks like from his performance, when was it? The weekend before last. His hold-up play looked really improved as well. He looked really sharp. And there's clearly a talent in there. And I'm not ruling out Joshua Xerxes having a solid Man United career as well. I think people have been far too quick to write him off, given his age as well. But I think having 3 top strikers is something that Man United haven't had for a number of years, because Anthony Martial was never really fit. There was a lot of stop gaps in that area. And I think someone like Victor Boniface is someone that gets the fans excited again and plays full throttle, intense football, and has just risen to every challenge that he's had to face so far. So you've got a big call, Mr. Dan slash Is Kulusevski or Mr. Boniface?
Well, I think Doogie's come up on the rails, I'm afraid.
Really?
He started off slowly, but I think he's delivered with his.
You like the big names,
attacking.
I think we've discovered.
I think maybe that's it. I'm a sucker for. I'd fit in perfectly at Man United. Just sign the big names.
Fair enough. I think it's a good pick. I think Victor Boniface is a good pick. I think
Diggs.
Kulusevski would have been a great pick as well. But that's, I think, one of my only victories on the Lowdown this season. So I'm delighted to get one over on Mikey. Look, hopefully Ruben Amorim is announced in due course. But to be honest, the sort of signings we're talking about could be useful for a lot of different profiles of manager that go in. So if the Ruben Amorim deal's off for some reason by the time this video goes live, I think this video still makes a lot of sense. Massive thanks to Mikey as ever. Pete, thank you so much. Excellent debut as Dan Ashworth. Brought a lot of life to the role. If people want to read your work and see your stuff, where should they find you?
Yeah, well, across skysports.com and the app, but of course, find my socials, Peter Smith XI. You know how you got a football 11 XI? That's me. Stick that after Peter Smith and you'll find me on most socials.
Love it.
Lovely.
Guys, thank you so much for watching. Let us know what you thought about our suggestions. Get in the comments with all your thoughts and we'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.